Hey there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV, where we discuss the things you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table with your family and friends. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the question of whether or not the government is trying to flood farmers off of their land, because this is a question that I've heard come up several times with people, and I don't have all the answers to this stuff. It is an interesting question, especially when you look at the floods that happened with Hurricane Helene in the Carolinas, and then we had recent, just about a month ago, floods happen again in Virginia, Tennessee, and some of this, is just pure negligence on my perspective. I mean, you have levees that are breaking from people that aren't controlling dams. Here where we live, you had Hurricane Florence, where they literally let the dam water out, flooded farms all along the river here. So sometimes I think it is complete negligence, but there are some interesting stories that have not made it to the public eye over the last couple years that are rather interesting. And I wanted to bring this first story up. It happened last year. Nobody heard about it. There wasn't a news article out on it until this year. And basically what happened here is Fish and Wildlife, basically, the U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, tried to literally flood out a community, a farming community of about 56 people in North Dakota. They intentionally had imposed rules that would have flooded out access, complete access to this particular community. And the reason why I think this is important is because right now we're seeing massive changes to a lot of these agencies across the board. And some of it, I admit, I think that there are some really good people that are employed by some of these agencies, and mass firings aren't a way of filtering through that. What I think needs to happen is there needs to be a change at the leadership level. There needs to be a change in policy that doesn't allow all of these agencies to make up their own rules whenever they want to and persecute us for it. That is actually unconstitutional. We have in our country a Congress that was created to enact rules, to create laws. That's what they're there for. And at some point in time, these people that we elected decided that they were too lazy to enact all the laws that they felt we needed to have. And so they just let the agencies, there wasn't a ruling, there wasn't a law that said that they had the right, but they just let these agencies come up with the rulemaking by themselves. And so you have a bunch of agencies. There are more laws on the books you can go to jail for enacted by these bureaucratic agencies, believe it or not by Congress. So you could be finding yourself getting fined, sent to prison, all sorts of things by laws that were never enacted by Congress because of these agencies. This is not democracy. Democracy, we elect officials to make rules, to make laws, to protect our society. When you have people who are unelected, who have their own interests, and science or research, anybody who tells you the science is final is BS. It's constantly changing. But they enact these laws, and people around our country suffer from it on a regular basis. And that's what happened in North Dakota. So Northland Township in North Dakota is a small farming community of about 56 people. And at the end of 2023, they started experiencing some severe flooding. And what happened last year in 2024 was that the township voted after one of the townspeople had actually dug a ditch so that they could continue to get emergency vehicles into the area and other things. Their road is completely flooding over. I want you to see this. Now, in 2024, the township voted for this guy who had dug the ditch to go ahead and drain a watershed partially into another watershed. So the water was just being displaced in order to protect the roadway, in order to protect the citizens, in order to keep access to these people and make sure that they didn't just get simply flooded out. So this goes back to the 1960s, actually, when Fish and Wildlife had purchased a bunch of land to protect Prairie Pothole wetlands in Ransom County and surrounding areas. And at the time that they purchased this land from the farmers that they're now trying to flood out, or they were trying to flood out last year, the farmers were told that they would be able to continue to operate as normal, to be able to continue to farm the land as normal. Of course, That all changed in 2023 when the last administration decided, oh, well, we're just going to change the rules on how we protect these wetlands. And in doing so, what they created was a situation where the waters were rising. There was no way to drain them. There was no legal way to drain them because of this rule that the agency decided to come up with. And because of that, the roadway was completely flooding out. They couldn't get emergency vehicles across if somebody had an emergency. And it was getting to the point where they wouldn't be able to drive across this road themselves to get in and out of the community. They were literally being cut off from the rest of us. And none of us actually heard about this because what ended up happening here is Fish and Wildlife came in and told them, you guys fill that in, fill the ditch in, or you're toast. You stop the drainage or we're going to implement fines. People can go to jail. They threw out every threat that they possibly could. Now, you could imagine that the last administration probably didn't want the public knowing about this. So what ended up happening was the township got attorneys. They brought their attorneys in. Once the attorneys got involved, immediately there were solutions by Fish and Wildlife to remedy the situation. But I mean, these guys were threatening them. They were literally trying to cut off the town. There's no logical reasoning to what they were doing to protect ducks, I guess. But at what point in time do our bureaucratic agencies put ducks ahead of human beings? It wouldn't have impacted, from an ecological standpoint, it really wouldn't have impacted the watersheds that much to drain one watershed into the other watershed, which is what they were doing. The road had existed for 80 years prior to any easements, prior to any other agreements. The water was only lowered beside the road. The refuge system still contained the same amount of water. So it had absolutely no impact on the conservation of the land. Fish and Wildlife was just simply trying to implement this new rule that had come out of the administration that was basically about to cut off that entire community. But when it comes to flooding out farms and turning farmland into floodplains, one of the things that I think we've seen in at least Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and a lot of other places across the United States is that sometimes these big water reservoirs create new flood zones. When their dams breach, more water floods there than would have naturally ever flooded in those areas. And so when we talk about people who have had a home on a property for years, or they've owned, their family has had generations that lived on a property, and suddenly it becomes a floodplain, a lot of times it comes down to how we're managing those resources to begin with. And mismanagement can cause a lot of problems. In Texas, they're about to build another large reservoir where they're going to take a bunch of farmland, flood it in, because they might need the water someday, right? Because water's running out, apparently. I've said this a lot when it comes to the carbon cycle, when it comes to the water cycle. The water isn't running out, carbon isn't increasing, it's just being misplaced. The thing that I don't think people are really looking at, yes, it's going to impact the farmers' land, obviously, where they're building the reservoir, because they're going to have to take that land by eminent domain and then flood it. But the people who are downstream from that dam will suddenly find themselves within a new floodplain, because when that dam has to emergency release, which is going to happen more frequently than 200 years, 500 years, because we never manage our dams properly, when they have to let those flood waters release, it creates additional flooding.
Let your friends and family know that you defend the right to farm by buying a leather patch hat from Unasa Trading Co. We also have an array of Defend the Right to Farm t-shirts, Defend the Right to Ranch t-shirts. Make a statement, check out our collections, and support the channel.
Anyway, guys, that's just a little bit of food for thought today. I've got a lot of work I need to get done, but I'll get some more videos out to you shortly. When we're looking at the situation in North Dakota, for example, where the agency was just completely overstepping itself in a position that was putting people in harm's way. And here's the thing, it wouldn't have made a slightest difference on the preservation of those wetlands, right? They were literally lowering the water levels just at the roadway there by a couple feet. The rest of the water, the wetlands, was pretty much untouched, okay? But this is an example of how these agencies have been kind of overstepping and stepping on farmers and ranchers. I mean, we've heard a lot about this over the last couple of years. You've heard about the mod case, and it's become a massive machine of rulemaking And these rules aren't voted on by the people. They aren't voted on by elected officials. They're voted on by career bureaucrats who are looking at these things from 1,400 miles away in Washington, D.C., saying, this is our rule. You break it, you go to jail. This is our rule. You break it, you pay the fine. I think that something has to change at the agency level. And like I said, I don't necessarily, know if mass layoffs across the whole board, that's interesting to those who want to see the budgets cut, and I'd like to see the budgets cut as well. But what would be more meaningful to me is kind of going in and doing a reworking of the agencies from the leadership down, and recruiting people to the agencies who have the interests of the American people at heart, as well as conservation. I think conservation is to our best interest. That's why I look at, a lot of these national parks and state parks, and I appreciate them. It's where it goes too far, and it's no longer in our best interests, and it doesn't make any ecological sense in the case of this North Dakota town. It doesn't make any sense at all. It didn't have any impact on anything other than cutting people off. I mean, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to cut off a farming community? A farming community that willingly sold you their land to put into preservation? Anyway, guys, stay tuned, and we'll get some more videos out to you shortly.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.